Well, welcome, and I am your host, and my name is Britton. Today, I just wanted to get on here before we start our conversation and let you know that I am not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I speak to people that are in those professions, and this channel is for information only. Hopefully, it's good information that you can apply to your life. So, as I speak to those guests, and if you feel like you want to support any of those, some of them are authors, blogs, mental health advocates. They have foundations, not-for-profits. If you want to support those people, I'll put the links in the description below. Also, if you'd like to support the Suicide Monk podcast and help keep this moving forward, I'll put that GoFundMe in the link below. I'll put the link down there for the Ashes to Life coaching as well. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us keep moving forward. And any prayers, lifting up, good vibes, we will take them. Thanks a lot. Again, we'll see you on the good side. Well, welcome to the Suicide Monk, and I am your host, and my name is Britton. Today we have Brian Sachetta. Is that right? Did I say that right? Nice. Man, my pronunciations are getting better. But you're an author of a couple books, and they have to do with anxiety. You got Volume 1 and Volume 2, Get Out of Your Head, a toolkit for living with and overcoming anxiety. So very specific in kind of your pursuit and helping people to try to kind of tackle this thing that is very, very debilitating for a lot of people, and that is anxiety. Do you want to tell me about like what kind of brought you to this? I'm assuming that you struggle with anxiety. I'm assuming that this has been a part of your life for a while, because you look like a young man. I mean, probably made what, 30s?
There you go.
And so this is compared to me in a short time, it has affected you profoundly enough to push you in a direction to write a couple books and try to help people out of that thing. And I think if I'm correct, you're a coach as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So, nice. I mean, happy to jump into all of that if you want me to now.
Absolutely. Please do. Talk to me about your childhood a little bit and how you grew up and when that was first discovered for you.
Yeah. I'm fortunate to be able to say that I lived a really good childhood, had two supportive parents, great people, have a brother who is about my age, a couple years older, lived in a nice neighborhood. And I think one of the things, right, is like as I got older, I think when you live in a nice neighborhood and you are fortunate, right? You kind of develop this sense that you're sheltered from the world a little bit, and you develop this sense almost that like nothing bad can happen to you kind of thing, right? Oh, like life is peachy and it's just going to stay that way. And somewhere in, late high school, I really started struggling with my own anxiety, and I didn't really know what that was at the time. I didn't have a label for it. I didn't know how to describe it other than saying that I was incredibly nervous, right, in certain situations. So that would be basketball games, track meets, going on dates with girls that I was interested in, that sort of thing. And as I went through high school and then into college, like my struggles with the anxiety got worse and worse to the point where, I was developing panic attacks. I was having trouble focusing, trouble going after like the things that I wanted to go after in my life because I was so nervous about them, right? And I would say, as you alluded to, the problem became apparent pretty quickly where once, within a short amount of time, I was like, this is something that I struggle with. I might not know what to call it. I might not know the ins and outs of it yet, but I know that I have identified that this is a large problem in my life. And so that became the catalyst for wanting to do my own research, figure this thing out, learn a bunch of tactics, strategies that could help me advance my own life, my own condition. And then from there, right, I'd say over the course of 10 years, I was basically trying to take in as much information as I could about anxiety and my own mental health and disseminate what was helpful and what was not helpful, right? And then eventually I was trying to basically like compile what I refer to as a mental health toolkit. Is, what are the tactics, what are the methods and practices that work for you, me specifically, right? And then it's like, when you're going into situations that make you anxious or make you feel a certain way, can you pull those tools out and utilize them to change your state, to change your mindset, to change how you're feeling in the moment? So that was like, and I obviously it's a condensed journey. There's so many stories in there that I could tell, but I really focus on that 10-year timeline, in the sense that that was when I learned a ton of stuff, and I also started writing, my first book, and doing the blog and all that stuff. Was just really focused on, one, helping myself, right? The writing is, if nothing else, it's cathartic, in the sense that it helps you make sense of old memories and old
Hmm.
difficulties, possibly some traumas. But also, right, is like, if you do it the right way, or you share it with other people, the hope is that you affect some people positively. And so for me, I felt as though I had struggled a lot with anxiety, and the pain was significant, to the point where I was like, I would talk to other people and they would say, "Hey, I'm dealing with something similar." And the piece of me that is empathetic feels that on an emotional level, and says, "I have been through something like that before, and it is horrible." And so I don't want, you're going through it. I wish you didn't have to, but since you are, like, maybe I can be of assistance to you. And that's where, the writing and just the brand Get Out of Your Head came from, was wanting to serve people on that level, wanting to meet them on that emotional level, and say, like, I have been there before. And it's not about me. It's more just, I think I understand this fight, right? And if I can be of service to you, I would like to try. And I think I've been able to do that for some people. But again, it has helped me help myself, and then also help other people. It feels good to help people, right?
Sure. Well, you're turning your pain into passion, and I think that's purpose, right? I mean, you take something that's adverse in your life, and then you transfer it into something that is useful for somebody else, instead of the opposite and making it worse for yourself and others. And so, yeah, that's great, man. I'm glad that really. So you had basically about a 10-year period there, that um, from your basically mid-teens to early 20s, or mid 20s, probably
I would say
mid
that
to.
was the critical period, right? Where I started writing, I started laying the groundwork for the first book when I was 25. So that would have been 2015. And
Okay.
it just felt like, yeah, a condensed period of like so much pain and so much dealing with this anxiety, that I, obviously there's many ways that all these things could go. But for me, I guess, fortunately, in some regards, was like, it felt as though the pain was significant enough to push me to find solutions. And then I did find some of those solutions. And as I started to come up with them, I don't know, I felt so good in finding them, that I was like, I want to do something with this information. I want to, obviously it's helping me, but I want to share this information because I'm so passionate about the subject. Um, everybody gets anxious about different things, and that's not to, I, that's totally okay, right? We're all good at some things, we're all not so good at other things. And it's interesting to talk to certain folks, right? Where I may say, "Hey, I'm going on a flight tomorrow, I'm a little nervous about flying." And then you talk to a business person and they're like, "Oh, I take like 3 flights a day." Or you talk to a flight attendant and they're like, "I live in the sky, like I'm not afraid of it whatsoever," right? So I think there is power in sharing stories with one another, and also sharing some of the mindsets and the perspectives of being like, "Hey, this is how I look at this specific topic. Maybe that can help you," and vice versa. So that was the goal for me, kind of writing the content or getting started with the content. But it was also like, wanting to hit people at a broad level and say, regardless of the subject of your anxiety, right? So regardless of whether you get anxious about flying, or going on a job interview, going on a date, something like that, I wanted to give people tactics that were situation agnostic, if you will, right? Things that relatively reliably worked across different circumstances. And so that, again, that was another reason for getting started with the content, was knowing that there's a lot of people out there suffering, and suffering for many different reasons. Let's see if we can hit them at all those different levels, and potentially give them some hope and some help on their journey.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. Um, When venturing down, did you have severe anxiety? Is it like debilitating, depressive? What did you find out um, as you started to delve into learning about anxiety and some of those symptoms of that, but about your own anxiety? Because I'm sure there's different things that take people there. I don't know much about anxiety. I've experienced it on a very, very small level. Thank God it's not a big thing for me. It's debilitating. It's probably one of the worst short-term feelings I've ever had in my life. And I can't imagine having that on even into the next level. And I was on the very low side of that. So what did you uncover learning about anxiety, like the root causes of anxiety and where that kind of comes from? I'm sure you discovered that in many different ways for yourself, but also for other people as well.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, right? So I think the first thing I want to say is that anxiety hits people on different levels, right? So it's like
Mm-hmm.
for some, they deal with panic attacks or panic disorder, right? And maybe not as much generalized anxiety disorder, which might, so if we talk about panic disorder, it's like they're anxious about having a panic attack, and that kind of controls their life to be like looking around the next corner, fearing and wondering where the next panic attack is coming from. And when you said you have dealt with anxiety, not a lot, but in that moment or in those moments when you did, it was intense. And it's, you're like, wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. To me, I'm not diagnosing, and I can't do that because I'm not a doctor. But like, man to man, I'm like, yeah, that feels reminiscent of panic attacks and things that I've been through. And so, again, there's all sorts of different ways that anxiety can affect people. But if we go back to, or if we think about almost the second part of the question, and obviously there was a bunch of different things to delve into there, but it's like, what are some of the root causes of anxiety? How do you think about it? How do you break it down, right? So anxiety is essentially future-oriented fear is what I like to say, right? So fear is like, everybody knows what it feels like to be scared. And I guess the semantic difference between fear and anxiety is the time period, right? So if you are in the woods right now and a bear crosses your path, all those feelings you feel in your body, that is fear. Anxiety is more the fear feeling, but not associated with an immediate threat, right? So it's more like
Right.
worrying about being in front of a bear in the woods a month from now. And that's, I use that proverbially, right? It could be your version of a bear. That
Mm-hmm.
might be having a conversation with your spouse. That might mean getting in the car and driving. That might mean giving a presentation or a speech. There's a lot of different things that make people anxious, right? And it's not my job to say, they should or shouldn't get anxious over certain things. We all have, again, going back to what I said earlier, we're all good at some things and not so good at other things, right? So you think about then, okay, so if anxiety is future oriented fear, like, where does it come from? What are the sources of it and all that? Pretty quickly, when you start researching it, you see that it like traces back to the nervous system, right? So when you are anxious, there's a part of your nervous system called the there's a part of the autonomic nervous system, which is kind of the part of the nervous system that runs automatically. So you've got this part called the sympathetic nervous system, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
essentially your fight or flight nervous system. And when you are afraid, when you are aroused, when you are aroused is in like excitement, right? Or when you're anxious, the sympathetic nervous system comes online and revs up. And so what that looks like physically is your heart might race faster. Blood might start rushing to your extremities, your palms sweat, your vision, kind of, you get that tunnel vision kind of thing. And so we have this association with, sympathetic nervous system activation and anxiety, where it's like, okay, what's really going on is our bodies are preparing us for something that is scary or threatening. The difficulty with anxiety is that scary, threatening thing is not in front of us today. So even though some people might say, hey, Brian, you're not actually in front of a bear, just get over it, right? The difficulty is that the mind doesn't work that way. The brain doesn't work that way. The brain says, I want to be so certain that I'm not going to run into a bear that, if we have anxiety or if we're predisposed to anxiety, it's going to focus on that thing intently until it has reason to believe that bear is not going to come up, right? So real life example or more real life example for today would be, you have a public speech that you have to give in a month. And you know that you have to give it. And even though you're not on stage right now, it's still a scary proposition. And you have a whole month to think about it, to worry about it, to fear forgetting to say something important, fainting on stage, not remembering what you were going to say, saying the wrong things, all those, errors and omissions and faux pas you might make on stage. Your brain is hyperfixating on those things because it sees them as threats. And based on the way that it's, your nervous system is built, it's designed to try to get rid of those threats rather than necessarily just be like, hey, you know what? They exist. They might happen. Let's just forget about them, So one of the challenges is like the way that our bodies and our brains were built through evolution, through, again, I guess I haven't said this before, but many thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years of evading predators and being rewarded through survival for having that nervous system activation in front of those scary things and running away from them and therefore surviving. Our nervous systems are wired to say, let's run away from these things. Let's focus on them and find ways to get ourselves away from these situations, right? Or prevent them from arising in the first place. So the challenge that we face today is in our modern society, we're not facing as many real life bears. What we're doing is we're facing bears on our calendars a week, a day, a month from now, And so the challenge is like our brains still are hyperfixated on those bears. And what happens is we then have a lot of time to think about those proverbial bears or, threats. And we get caught in loops in our minds, and that generates a lot of fear in our bodies that we feel in that current moment. So a lot of what I talk about through my books and through my different practices, the reason why I say why the brand is called Get Out of Your Head is if you are stuck in your mind turning over those fretful thought patterns again and again and again, you're basically just going to continually activate your sympathetic nervous system. And that's not a good place to be because then you're really just running the fear circuits in your body. And so Get Out of Your Head is a message to readers and listeners to say, hey, as difficult as it may be, we need to be mindful about this process and say, now that we know and understand how it works, we need to methodically put these things down or find ways to put them down such that those fear circuits don't continue to run. Does that all make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know what it sounds like as you're describing this? It sounds like reverse OCD. Like they get these incessant thoughts and they have to do the thing so many times. If they don't, that thought continues. And that also creates stress and all these things. And so it's not necessarily a fear-based thing, but it's an obsessive focus. OCD can be.
Absolutely.
And that's what it sounds like you're describing to me now. And it sounds like the same thing I go through when I've been hurt as I play the tape over and over and over and over again, and then justify why it's that way, which creates stress and all these other things. Now, my body reacts differently than probably yours does because mine is not hyperventilating and tunnel vision. It's hyper acute, like rage. So, my body's reacting and my mind's reacting differently than yours based on my own experience and trauma and stuff like that. So that's what's really interesting to me is as you're describing this and as I've talked to people, and I have a buddy who's OCD, and it sounds similar. It's not the same. That's not what I'm saying, but it sounds similar in process. In a lot of ways. I mean,
to add, right, is if you look at the classifications of anxiety disorders, you have the umbrella category of anxiety, and then within that, right, it's social anxiety, right. It's obsessive compulsive disorder. So all of these things are in fact related, and it makes sense, and it's a good call out by you to. I love like when you have that outside perspective, right? For me to explain it in the way that I did, and then you're like, that sounds a lot like OCD, right? And it's like, you're totally right. Maybe I don't think about it that way all the time, but yeah, right nonetheless.
Yeah, and that's oftentimes I look at my own life and I look at my behaviors because I'm kind of forced to, and I recognize the little things. Like I was saying, I've experienced anxiety, so I kind of understand it. Like it's like, ooh, I'm good. My big thing is like suicide ideology. So I've gone through the gamut of a lot of different experiences, even with like a little touch of OCD and some anxiety and a lot of depression and a lot of ups and downs and just various different things and which makes it's very interesting because I understand what kind of these experiences are. And I'm so glad I don't have to do some of these on a regular basis. I'm so glad I'm me. And that sounds wild. You're like, so you'd rather have suicide ideology than anxiety? Hell yes. Why? Because I know the dance. I know it well. I would never want to transfer into something that I didn't understand, especially in my body that is reacting to something of the past. And that would be my next question: is does anxiety develop? Now, obviously, for you, it didn't develop out of trauma. It developed out of basically what it sounds like is worry, like your future and uncertainty and those things. Because you had a good life. It's not. I mean, but I know anxiety can also develop out of severe trauma or mild trauma, even in that, or none, for that matter. So how does
Yeah.
that does it run in your family? Is it a genetic thing? Is it do you know anything of that nature on the history of it?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot that I want to say on this as well, right? So the first point, kind of to echo what you just said, is, you know, it's challenging where it's like, I think we often, or society often, is like, hey, if you go to the psychiatrist and you sit on the couch long enough, they'll pull out some memory that, you know, it was the one thing that sparked all the problems in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, like, we are, you know, what do they say? We contain multitudes, or whatever. There's a lot of
Yeah,
different factors that come together in this confluence that shape who we are, right? And so it's like, um, if I look back and say, like, you know, how much capital T trauma have I been through? I wouldn't say that much, but maybe lowercase t, you know, in the sense of like things that were challenging for me to process and deal with, but not, you
sure,
know, on the same scale as, you know, completely life threatening or anything like that.
sure,
And I
sure.
guess quick tangent or side note, right, is like my anxiety tends to be on the social side of things. And how I
Mm.
think about that is like, one, I care, you know, I care about other people, like just in general, but I also care, like most people do, how I am perceived. And so when you care too much about that perception, you're then worrying about how people are looking at you and judging you and all that. And so that is one piece of the puzzle. The other, oh, there's many, but I guess just to break it down a little bit
Sure.
right now, right?
Yeah.
So, on the trauma side, right? It's like I, you know, the first story that I tell in my first book is I went off to college. I didn't have that much experience in the dating realm. In fact, I had a panic attack in front of a girl that I liked about 6 months before I went off to college. And to me, like that was a difficult experience, right? Like I would say that's kind of like lowercase t, where to me it was very upsetting, unsettling. I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to process it in the moment. It was this girl that I was really interested in. We had been on a few dates, and then we just had this super awkward moment, right? Where I'm super nervous in front of her. I'm trying to like have a conversation and I can't do it because my body is just freaking out. And, you know, it's not like she was crazy rude about it or anything like that, but from her perspective, she's probably like, what the heck is going on? This is weird at the very least, you know? So
Right.
I think she probably did as best she could with it. But to me, it was just like so overwhelming, so, you know, all encompassing that I look back on that moment and I'm like, yeah, I see how that shaped a lot of my life. Right. And then went off to college 6 months later and had a very similar experience, except for the fact that the second time around, the girl was not nice about it. You know, she called me a lot of names and all that. And, it's not, this isn't to air my dirty laundry or
No,
anything
no,
like
no.
that.
You're fine.
She's a good person. Like I still know who she is, and we are friendly, and it's totally fine. It's like she had been drinking a little bit, but um, you know, I think one of the things there is to look back and be like, realizing that like we can all affect each other on extremely large levels without necessarily realizing it, right? Whereas like
Mm-hmm.
her and I remained friends throughout college, even though like we clearly had this very bad interaction that shaped my social life and my dating life, even if just on a, you know, a mental level, for a long time, where it was like going into similar situations in the future, right? My brain has linked up, hey, I'm going on an intimate experience, whether it's a date or they're coming over or whatever, with anxiety, with panic. And now it's like almost avoidance behaviors to be like, I don't want to do these things. because things have gone so poorly in the past. And so I associate something that should be good or could be good with pain, right? And so it's like the brain just makes this quick rationalization at times to be like, avoid, 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 right? Where I was going with the trauma piece was like, to me, I would almost say those are like two of the most traumatic things that I've been through. Which is funny because actually when it was 2018, I was on vacation with my family in Hawaii, and there was a news story that ended up coming out that everybody saw about. But while we were on the island and while everybody else was there as well, we got these, kind of like government alerts, as if the same kind that you would get for like an Amber Alert, right? And so the alert says like, basically there's a nuke coming to Hawaii, and more or less like, this is not going to end well, right? It was like, seek shelter, this is not a drill, whatever. And in the moment, like that's the most scared I've ever been in my life. And for the next day and a half, like I was so messed up. I was just like completely like PTSD, dissociated, just didn't want to be, I was just so freaked out. But then I look back and I'm like, that actually, even though that was much scarier and I would say probably more traumatic than, the one-on-one dating experiences, that really didn't have much of a lasting effect on my own life. And so again, to kind of answer the question in a roundabout way of what causes anxiety is, who knows exactly, right? There are a lot of different factors and we can suss some of them out. But we can't always be like, hey, Britton, we're going to put you into a car crash and, and we know that that's going to make you anxious for the rest of your life. It's like different factors affect people on different levels, right? It's almost like the notion of you need to have fertile soil for the seed going into the soil to blossom and grow, right? But we don't know exactly what those conditions are for different people. At the same time, we can say, broadly speaking, trauma can definitely be one of them. I think, another one is sort of like lack of confidence or lack of skills in a particular area, right? So if we say that all anxiety is rooted in uncertainty, and you think about being confident, right? It's like, if you're confident, you're pretty certain that things are going to go a certain way, or you're confident, you are certain in your abilities to get certain things done. The opposite of that is uncertain, right? I don't know, like I'm not sure I'm capable of doing these things and whatnot. And so I guess just to tie it back to my own story is like, hey, if you don't have that much experience on the dating front, and then you have a bunch of catastrophes or disasters, whatever you want to call them, just unfortunate situations come about, that really hurts your confidence, right? And then you go to another situation and you're like, I still don't have this much evidence that I am capable of doing this thing, whatever it is. And again, it could be dating, it could be giving a speech, it could be jumping out of an airplane, whatever it is, right? The more corrective experiences you have, or the more supportive experiences you have in that field, the more likely you are to feel confident in your ability to make things happen on that front. And that's not to say that like the anxiety surrounding it will go away forever, right? Often people will cite, professional athletes where it's like, I want to say Bill Russell, 11-time NBA champion, he would throw up before every single game, even though he had won countless championships and was, one of the best players of all time. I would imagine though, there is a little bit less pressure, or as he went along, he'd be like, hey, this is, to your point, right? This is the devil that I know, right? And I've been down this road before, so I don't like throwing up before games, but I have all this evidence that I can look back on and say, I won this championship. I won that championship. We won these games. I had a lot of good games, a lot of great performances. And as that evidence starts to stack up, you then feel more competent, which builds that confidence, right? And in turn, you're like, okay, I have some confidence, therefore I have some certainty. The more certainty I have, the less anxiety I am likely to experience, because I've at least convinced my brain and my body on some level that I can do this. I can bring about the outcomes that I am looking to bring about. So yeah, I mean, as you can tell, I'm passionate about this subject, and there's a lot of different routes we could go down here in terms of where does anxiety come from and all that. But I think, yeah, just a couple ones to highlight there were trauma, confidence, certainty. So yeah, those are some big ones.
So I've seen little trauma send people to the edge of their life, literally, just a little bit, a breakup, something happens at home, it sends them over the edge. And so I've had this conversation before. I'm not sure why they're saying big T and little T now. I understand the some traumas aren't as severe. That's fair. Um, but some of those little T's, little traumas, can be very severe and send people to an edge and open doors that and dark doors in their life that they never knew were there. So I'm still struggling with that. Still trying to unpack the little traumas, and just because of what I do, it's everybody's story matters. It's you didn't have that great of a trauma, but it still created 10 years worth of havoc in your life, right? So that's not small at all. And it
Yeah.
drove you to build or write 2 books and help people suffering from this. That's not small.
Yeah, I mean, you make such
And
a great point. And sorry to butt in, but I think
no,
where
you're
it
fine.
comes from, right, is like, if this is a total guess, but my take on it is it has to do with like the internet and the fact that we are now talking to potentially so many people at once, right? Where if you go and tell some story about like, and I'm not saying it's right, but I'm just saying this is the world we live in, right? If you tell some story and say my trauma is X, and everybody's like, dude, like on the grand scheme, like, hey, my whole family died in a plane crash, right? It's like this we're all in this comparison, like suffering
Right.
Olympics kind of thing. And so I use those terms just to be like, look, like, yeah, it was painful for me, but like, yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I guess back to what you had said earlier is like, if I had to choose, an intimate experience where I have a panic attack versus like I lose my whole family, like I'm taking the panic attack a million
Right.
times out of a million, So I think two truths can exist at once, which is it's weird that we make the separation, even though I do it, and at the same time, like little T trauma can be real devastating and terrible
Yeah.
and push you to the edge. And I think kind of like a last piece here is just that, yeah, it speaks to the idea that it's important to make space for everyone. And in the sense that like whatever they're going through, I kind of equate it to like, hey, if somebody is devastated, it doesn't necessarily matter whether complete tragedy struck or they spilled their milk at the kitchen table. Those
Right.
feelings are what they are feeling right now. And so even if the reaction is oversized, we still have to deal with those feelings today. Maybe in the future we can bring perspective to that person's life to be like, hey, it's just some milk. No, let's try to gain that perspective on the situation. But for today, what's going on in that person's brain is what's going on, right? So we have to meet them where they are. And it's funny where I don't talk about this stuff that much, but it was like, let's say within the last couple years, I had a small breakup, and I was seeing a therapist, and the therapist was like, "Hey, how long did you see this girl again?" And I gave the answer, and it wasn't very long, and he was like, "Oh, this isn't a big deal. I don't know why you're upset." And I was very, very upset. And that to me, was reflective of our conversation right now, which was, hey, I could point to other people that I've dated for longer than that, right? And didn't have
Mm-hmm.
this reaction. So clearly some nerve was struck here. I don't know
Right.
what it is, but I was hoping that he would help enlighten me on that. And regardless of whether it's therapy or something else, it's just in our one-on-one conversations or in our conversations with friends and family and loved ones. It's like, yeah, we got to meet those people where they are. And if they're having a hard time, it's not really our place to judge the cause of that hard time, but just help them through those emotions right now. We can get to the root of it later on once they've gotten through the temporary crisis.
Sure. My therapist, I was seeing a therapist several years ago. I can't remember timeline. It's probably been 5 years ago. Um, I was struggling. Every time I go into public, I was like, I'm uncomfortable. I got this anxiety about it. And my therapist goes, well, it's just social anxiety. Boom. It was like light bulb. It's like, it made sense to me. I was like, but once I recognized it, I'm able to do something about it. Every time I go into public, I do pretty much the same ritual as nobody cares. Nobody's looking at you. Stop caring so much that you think that. And that's what I do. And I walk into a place and And I'm just a lot happier, and I can leave people with some of my joy that day because I'm not worried about what somebody else supposedly thinks. And I realize that's, I've been practicing that for, I don't know, a few years now, several years now. And even though I still go through the same ritual, I do it almost unconsciously. But as I think about it and talk to you about it, I'm like, yeah, I do. I did it today without even thinking about the ritual of it. It's like in the back of my mind, nobody's watching. And so maybe they are, but why do I care? If I present myself as well the way I am, and what do I have to worry about? And that's what I realized about, back in the 80s, everybody's worried about what they're wearing. The right pair of pants, the right parachute pants, the right bandanas, the right moccasin boots, whatever, name brand stuff. Now you can wear a $5 pair of jeans and nobody cares. And it's so odd to me that we were so caught in that mentality to have the best. Nobody cares what you have, and nobody cares what I look like. I can prove that right now because I've dated for 8 years, 7 years now, and it's that was a joke. It's serious, but I was just joking about the nobody cares. This so being a kind of a it's kind of fear based is basically what you're telling me. It's pretty much across the board. It's fear based, and that's a future fear.
Yeah, and I think that's the easiest way to put it, right? One thing
Sure.
that comes to mind is, you talked about going out and looking around, seeing people, right? There's a known thing in the psychology field called the spotlight effect. And it's just the
Mm.
idea that everybody kind of believes that there is a spotlight hanging over them, right? Shining down
Mm-hmm.
on them, calling them out, highlighting them in public, being like, if I do this, everybody's going to see it. When in reality, to your point, maybe I don't know if I'd go as far as to say nobody cares, but like
Right.
for the most part, right? Like we
Well, that's the
exaggerate.
conversation I have to have with myself.
Yep, yeah, exactly. And it's like,
Right.
for the most part, we exaggerate how much other people care. So it's like we think everybody's looking at us. In reality, we're all doing this game of like, oh, look at everybody else looking at me, but we're all doing that, so it doesn't matter.
So is there something that people can do in that? Like for me, I've transferred that. Instead of being anxious, I go in with a positive. Like one of my regiments is um, make make somebody's day, and I can do that within a few minutes. And this lady today, she was a little bit off. I could feel it in her, and she just wasn't the same person that I'd met the first time. She was very kind and uplifting and helpful, and blah, but she was a little down today. So I just poured on the nice, and I was very, very kind, and I was very patient. And by the end of our interaction, which was about 7 minutes, she had a whole different demeanor about her, and I just subtly did it. Um, and gave her little encouragements and looked her in the eye and smiled and told her, don't worry, you're okay, just you take your time. So I guess I gave her space as from her busyness and her stress, and that allowed her to relax. So what are some practices that you do, especially with social anxiety, that when you go into public, because a lot of people don't go into public when they have anxiety, and they don't know how to talk themselves off that ledge, and they don't know how to present themselves and be okay with who they are in that moment. So
Yeah,
what are some of the things that you would suggest that people could do, especially with social anxiety in that
for
manner?
sure. I think a few things come to mind, and all of them are related to what you said. So the first, right, is like in the psychology space, there's a thing called exposure therapy, right? Is what
Yeah.
essentially it's like, okay, there is something that you're afraid of. This is often used to deal with phobias, which are intense fears, like a
Yeah.
spider phobia or whatever.
PTSD, I think they push towards that exposure as well.
Yeah. So what you're trying to do is, you're not trying to say, hey, this person is deathly afraid of elevators, so shove them into an elevator and see how they do, send them up to the 100th floor, right? It's more meant to be a gradual exposure to the stimulus that scares them, that allows their brain and nervous system to retrain itself and reframe this stressor. So in context of the social sphere, right, I would kind of say is somebody is probably in their head playing something out like, I'm going to go outside, I'm going to see 100 people or even 10 people or some number. They're all going to be looking at me. I'm going to make some mistake. They're going to laugh at me, yada, yada, right? So exposure therapy is basically saying, take whatever it is that you're afraid of that scares you and just expose yourself to it in little doses. So if that means, hey, you get out of the house for like 15 seconds, great. What you're trying to do is you're trying to send a message to your brain, to your nervous system that like you just interacted with that stimulus that you're deathly afraid of and you are okay. And then after 15 seconds, you bump it up to 30 seconds or whatever the schedule is that works for you, but you want to do it at a pace that feels comfortable or approachable, right? So it's like, again, if somebody is afraid of social interactions and just being out in public, we wouldn't send them to a crowded marketplace. We would send them to the dog park and be like, hey, there's going to be one other dog owner there. Like, you don't even have to say hello to them. Just be there and try to exist for a minute and then go home, And so really just like slowly ratcheting up your exposure to the stimulus that is scaring you, that can help your brain kind of just slowly become okay with it, right? So that is one of the first things that I would say. Another thing that can be helpful, and I know this one is probably a little scarier to take on, but you talked about like, where does anxiety come from or what are some of the sources or whatever. And one of the things that I think about is like, we are all, rightfully so, we're very afraid of failure and humiliation and embarrassment and all that. And I'm certainly not telling people to go out and do the most embarrassing thing in the world. However, whatever you're ready for, whatever you're comfortable with. But often we paint these pictures in our heads that are worse than the actual worst case scenario, So it's not just I have social anxiety and that stinks and something bad could happen. It's I have social anxiety. I'm going to go to the market. I am going to have a panic attack there. I'm going to pee my pants. I'm going to pass out. All these things that like in reality, I'm not saying that those things have never happened to a person before, but those pictures that we're painting in our heads are worse than what is likely to happen, And
Sure.
so we then kind of extrapolate that fear out and associate it with anything bad that could happen. And then all of a sudden we start to fear all of those smaller things in a really big fashion. So I guess in the same kind of exposure style therapy, what I would say is if it's approachable, if it's possible, like you do want to get yourself, right? So this is sort of more just walking further down the exposure therapy path is, saying, hey, if it's social interactions that make you anxious, at some point you will have to interact with somebody, right? And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to desensitize yourself to not only the situation, but also the ramifications of it. And what that might mean is not only being like, I can be out in public for 1 minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but I can mess up in public and survive that and know that, and then come back and be like, I'm alive. It's okay, right? One of the challenges, and I think about it, and like I try to do all of this thinking and analyzing for my own benefit too, is like,
Right.
I have always kind of struggled a little bit on the dating front. And I'm like, when I really think about it, I'm like, I'll let's say I go out and I just make some horrendous error. I say the totally wrong thing to some woman, and not like a malicious or anything. I just say something that came off the wrong way. It didn't land, whatever. And then the person doesn't like me and XYZ, right? When you first make a mistake like that, it feels like the end of the world. You're like, I'm dead. I cannot believe that just happened. It's so horrible. And again, I'm not telling people to go out and purposefully be like, say the wrong thing and have it go horribly. But once you get enough of those failures under your belt, right, you start to be like, okay, I survived. I may have gone through pain in processing that situation for a while, but I survived and I'm still here. And there are other opportunities that I can take on where I can talk to more people, or I can, experience or confront the stressor that scares me. And so the key word of all of this is really desensitization. So it's being desensitized to that stressor or the stimulus, but then also, like I said, the ramifications. So it's like, eventually we want to get to the point where we're like, and I'm not trying to glamorize this in any way, but it's like, look, you kind of gotta get to the point where you're like, look, people mess up and it's all right, you know, and you just move on and you don't necessarily stew on it for too long. You find your way to the next situation, the next circumstance where if there's a goal that you're trying to achieve or a relationship that you're trying to bring about, it's like you move on to the next one and you kind of put your cards on the table and you see how you do with that. And if that one doesn't go well, again, you're building up that confidence to be like, not only are my skills getting better, but I am becoming more tolerant of failure. And as I become more tolerant of it, I become less scared of this whole situation in general. So that's the second one. And then very quickly, what I would say the third one is this really goes back to what you said, right? And we talked about the spotlight effect of how we all feel as though there is some light shining down on our heads and kind of, almost as if we're holding a sign that says, look at me. To your point, what we really need to do is like take the focus off of ourselves, right? Focus on other people. There's that kind of corny line, which is like if you're giving a speech or you're on stage or whatever, picture the audience in their underwear. And whoever came up with that, what they're really getting at is you're so focused on yourself and how you're going to mess up that you're forgetting the fact that like there are a lot of people in the audience who are not thinking the same thoughts that you are. Sure, there's some people out there that if you messed up, they'd laugh. But guess what? There's a lot of people out in that crowd too that are self-conscious, that are like, they're just totally anxious in this moment. They might not even be paying attention, right? So what you're trying to do is say, I'm taking the focus off myself and I'm just trying to live in the moment and have a good time. If that means, being nice and kind to a stranger, that's one way to do that. If that's, focusing on a different person, like let's say you're in a job interview, right? And you're like, hey, guess what? I'm nervous about this, but I bet this interviewer might be nervous too. And let me focus on them rather than on myself. Taking that focus off yourself allows you to just be more in the moment and kind of just really like, it's going to sound a little, I don't know, it's going to sound a little silly, but like kind of just let your subconscious take the reins and just act as though, instead of being in your head and being like, oh, do I do this next? Do I do that next? Like you're just kind of free flowing. And often, even though we don't want to trust ourselves, often that place of sort of autopilot is where we do want to get to, because when we trust in ourselves and believe in ourselves, often it's like, there was this episode of Doug. I don't know if anybody ever watched that TV show, but
it was that with the dog?
Yeah. With, pork chop.
It wasn't Harry Potter. It was the Schmeagol dude from Lord of the Rings.
The dog was Pork Chop. This is the cartoon from Nickelodeon.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking of it different.
So there's an episode where I think it's Doug's sister is trying to learn, she's trying to get her driver's license and she's trying to learn to parallel park and she can't do it. And she, the whole episode is centered around her not being able to do it. And then at some point they're out in public, she's driving the car and they come up on a situation where she needs to parallel park. And she starts getting into an argument with the people in the car. And then, slowly but surely, you see the car moving and she's just, without even thinking about it, she is parallel parking the car and she's doing it successfully because she's not focused on messing up. She's focused on the argument that she's having at that moment, right? And again, it's a cartoon, not necessarily real life, but I think the message that we might be able to take away from that is sometimes when we are not focused on ourselves and we're not focused on messing up, we're in the moment. We're just acting and, having a good time and sometimes actually acting pretty successfully and bringing about some of the results that we're seeking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I had another question. I lost it here a little bit ago. It was about the fear, and let me see if I can regain that. Man, there's a lot of information here. Yeah, I can't think of my question. I lost my track there.
So good.
Yeah. So, gosh, give me a second. Okay. I think I can get it out of here. I think I can get it out of this thought. A lot of times, facing those fears, I talked to this kid the other day. He's probably 19, and I was talking to him about what's coming next for me and my journey. And we started talking about backpacks and climbing and hiking in South America, and started talking about heights. And he goes, I'm terrified of heights. And I was like, you know what, how you fix that? Because I am too. terrified of heights. My dad held me upside down out of a bucket truck when I was just a little kid, 30 feet in the air outside the bucket, like Michael Jackson holding his little kids out. Except for I remember this. And ever since that point, I've always been terrified of heights. I'm also a climber. I like to rappel. You know, I, I kind of run headlong into the fears that because I live in a lot of fear. And so my life growing up was basically littered with it. Growing up in the neighborhoods I grew up in in the home that was not safe, and the school wasn't safe, and just didn't really have so fear was my thing. I've never known anything but to just bull rush fear until recently. And now I'm I'm not just facing fear, I'm surrendering to fear and in a different way. So, and what I mean by that is like with rage, it comes on very, very quickly. Um, and a lot of times, most of the time in my life, it's been unstoppable. Now I understand I have the capability. I'm the one in control of this. I'm the one that allowed this in my life. I'm responsible for this. This is my bear that I have to wrestle all the time. So the bear's bigger than me. Why do I keep wrestling a bear? That why not just pet the damn thing? Live with it, be okay with it, and then put it to rest. Quit fighting it and quit, trying to match punches with it because it's bigger than I am. And rage is huge. So one of my practices this season is when I start to get frustrated. That's the beginning. That's the very beginning. And when I feel frustration, I know rage is in proximity. And not necessarily that I'm going to go there, but it's in proximity and it's just waiting to pounce. So I start to kneel to it. I start to get on my knees. I'm just like, I don't have the fight. I don't have the fight anymore to do this. And you know what? Within 30 seconds to a couple minutes, my spirit's calm, my body's calm, my reaction, my brain is calm, my mind. And then all I have to do is hold on to that because I can get up off my knees, breathe, and start to, that overexcited feeling starts to, has dissipated to a point where I can just breathe. And then a few minutes later, that's all gone. And I'm proud of myself. I'm like, what the hell? Instead of feeling shame and more anger because I'm angry, and shame because I got angry, and shame because I said the things I said to myself and to my faith and to whoever else that was running through my head. So one of my questions is forgiveness and grace. These are two very important things, I think, in all of our lives for peace, for peace, joy, and happiness. These two things that are very, very difficult, easy to say, not easy to do. How does that play into the anxiety, if it does at all? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, well, let me say congratulations on that progress because that's amazing.
Right.
It sounds like I want to talk to that, and then I also want to talk to the question itself. So
Sure.
there's kind of four things there. I think of awareness, right? So like being able to develop
Mm-hmm.
the muscle inside of you, the cognitive muscle, to be able to say, "Hey, I am recognizing these things when they're coming on." That is a big part of the battle with anxiety, right? Because what happens
Is there a
is
moment though? Is there a moment when you can say, "Oh, that's it"?
I
If you
do
start
think
to, if you start to consciously like be aware of it,
I do
go ahead.
think there is. I think the challenging thing is just that it's really hard,
Mhm.
where you look at like neuroscience and it's like we have 60,000 thoughts a day or something like that. And, most of them are not new ones. So it's like if we're anxious people, then a lot of those non new thoughts are anxious thoughts. And so we have conscious thoughts and subconscious ones, right? And often what's happening is like the subconscious train is rolling real fast before we even notice it.
Mhm.
And that's the real difficult part. It's easier, still not easy outright, but easier when you are consciously thinking something through that is making you fearful or anxious. And you can kind of take a breather, take a step back and be like, oh, I'm doing that thing. The difficulty, I think, is when it's that subconscious process, because it's like that's happening sometimes before it has even hit your conscious mind and before you're aware that you're doing it, or you could even be aware that you're doing it. At the same time, we do our best, right? So the
So
awareness
let me
piece,
ask you this real quick. Do you feel it in your body before you feel it in your brain? Because I can feel the anger well up in my body before I feel it consciously.
that's a great question.
Well, think
I
about that. Maybe we'll come back to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that most of mine is kind of like in my head, but it's you
Because
get
they
the
say
mind.
the body remembers, and the if the body remembers, because my brain knows that I'm reacting out of anger. I'm reacting to something stupid. I dropped my keys 3 times. I can't pick them up because depth perception and blah blah blah. I'm blind, and so I get frustrated, and then boom, everything else is just explodes. Every little thing is just that dropping the keys. But I feel that I've dropped the keys once. I know it's coming. Like that's the first thing.
Got it.
And as soon as I let go the second time, I feel it. So if I pay attention to my body, I'm wondering if then I can recognize in my mind that I can stop myself. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm asking. I didn't mean to interrupt all that because I know you were on a flow.
No, no worries. It's a good question. I think, and maybe I need to do more introspection, but I think most of mine, it's in my head. There is, you've got the mind body connection, and it's like sometimes it can be hard to tell which one started first because they both influence each other quite a bit. So you're thinking scary thoughts, and then you're activating that sympathetic nervous system we talked about earlier. So then maybe your heart starts racing, and then because your heart is racing a little bit faster, the thoughts start going stronger and faster as well. And then you're like, oh, why is my heart racing? I'm feeling anxious. And you're in that feedback loop, right? So it can be difficult to figure out where the loop started, as is the case with kind of any loop. I think for me, just to give a quick answer, I think I would say the head. But to also talk about the other parts of the question, right? So we talked about awareness, and then I guess in general, just like, so mindfulness, right? The people talk about that a lot in society these days, and it's like, what does it mean to be mindful, right? It just means to have your attention be focused on what you are experiencing in the current moment. So to your point of like, when you are able to say, ooh, I'm getting that feeling in my body, and I think that maybe the anger might be coming, you're bringing your own mindfulness practice to the table, right? To be like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling that certain thing right now. I'm experiencing that certain thing. And so we can be mindful about pretty much anything, right? Like what we're saying, what we're thinking, what we're eating. If we're eating, then the flavors and the aromas and all that. And so it's just like trying to be more present with whatever stimuli are going around, in our current environment, to be like, hey, I noticed that thing. And then I think about how it makes me feel. Maybe that gets me somewhere, right? So mindfulness is obviously a big piece of this puzzle. The other two things you talked about, so I think forgiveness and grace,
Mm-hmm.
and then what those sort of, I will probably touch on those indirectly. Like what those remind me of is there's like a Buddhist phrase that basically says, what you resist persists. And so when you talked about wrestling the bear, it's like, hey, yeah, the more you wrestle with the bear, the more beat up you're probably going to get. Because like you said, that bear's bigger than you. It's got claws and all that. And even if you train a lot and you work out and you're like, hey, you know what, bear? Like, bring it on. I can take it. That's still a formidable opponent, right? And so it's like eventually you get to the point where you're like, it's probably not worth wrestling with the bear.
Yeah.
And, I talk about this in my first book as well, which is like, you get to a point where you're like, I've been fighting, I've been wrestling so many times. Where has it gotten me? That I think eventually it cracks you open and makes you say to yourself, I got to try something else. And that other thing, that something else, can sometimes be, kind of taking on an attitude of nonchalance, or, I don't give a crap, or whatever. And it doesn't have to be that extreme. It could just be like a little bit more accepting, right? Because one of the challenges is like, going back to that phrase of what you resist persists. If we think about that in terms of anxiety, we say, okay, what does that mean? if I'm experiencing a panic attack, or if I am experiencing, anxiety in the moment where my heart is racing and my palms are sweating and, I'm getting that tunnel vision and all that, if we're resisting that feeling, then we are tightening up physiologically, right? Or physically, and we're sending a message to our brains and to our bodies that like everything is not okay. And once they get that message, they're like, oh, it's not okay. Okay, this is a threat that we're experiencing. This is a threatening situation. Therefore, what do we do when we are in danger? And the we is
Right.
just kind of, third person or whatever. But
Yeah.
the we
It's
is
the
basically,
imaginary
okay,
person.
exactly. Brain and body, fire up those alarms, get the sympathetic nervous system revving even faster and harder and all of that. And so, when you're able, I know it sounds cheesy, but it's like when you're able to provide that reassurance to your nervous system to be like, hey, yeah, this is scary, but I'm good. Like I'll get out of this. You're sending these messages that are like, okay, even though this is frightening right now, we don't need as many resources here. This isn't quite the, extinction level
Right.
event that we are maybe making it out to be. And so when we wrestle, right, we get that tightness and we get that fear and we send those really threatening messages to our nervous system. When we do the opposite and we say, hey, you know what? It stinks, but I'm okay. We also do we do the opposite, which is to again just tell our nervous systems to like take it from a code red down to some lesser extreme color or level, and so I think it's important to be able to do that because often we start with this I don't know, like especially for men, right? I remember when I was first dealing with anxiety, I read a couple books where it was like and ebooks and stuff like that, and it was like you got to like man up and like tell your anxiety you're not going to back down and whatnot. And it's like, hey, if that works for somebody, that's great. But I don't know. I tried that many times. And to be honest, like that just puts so much pressure on yourself
Mm-hmm.
and your nervous system. And like, you get to the point where you realize like your brain, and I obviously it's hard to make these distinctions, but I'm like, your like brain, like the old parts of your brain, like in the back there, the hindbrain and all that, the brainstem are so wired for survival and are so much stronger than your conscious mind. It's like if you really want to get in a battle with that thing, good luck, because it will take you to some deep and dark places that I don't know if you want to go, right? So it's like the more that you wrestle with that, the stronger those symptoms of anxiety will be. And yeah, I guess I would just say like I wouldn't invite you on that path. I wouldn't go down that path myself. Instead, I'd take the more comforting approach and be like, hey, brain, we got this. We'll be fine. It might stink for a little while, but we're going to get out of it just like we got out of it all those other times. And then you just move on to some other part of your day,
Yeah. And you're talking about the. I think you kind of have mentioned, dealing with this and coming to a place, and then it kind of derailing again. I might have had a kind of different conversation with somebody about that.
That's all right. We can talk about it.
But there's these, we often like what I'm going through. I believe, I know that I have the capability to put my rage to rest. Okay. I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I can make it appropriate. I have the ability to allow it to be appropriate. I have not allowed it to be appropriate in my life. It has taken and destroyed everything, just like anxiety, OCD. I mean, all these things can, send you over the edge. Like my buddy had the OCD kind of fueled his drinking and calmed a lot of that stuff. So there's other things that can lead into taking things away from you. So anxiety can ruin a lot for people. I guess that's my point on that. But the hell, I forgot where I was going.
Well, I can riff off that for a minute, right? Which is
Perfect.
anxiety. It can be hell for a lot of people, and it is, And you talked about kind of like, things resurfacing. Maybe that was the term that you used, or similar. I think it's an important.
Just going through a different part of that season.
For sure.
They're like right now for me, everything's amped up. The rage is high, the anger, the frustration, the guilt, all that stuff is amped. And what it's doing for me that it never did in the past is it's pushing me towards change. And that it's a very different response than I've ever had because again, I always stood up to it. And allowed it to be a part of me, and then it affected everybody around me. Now, in this position, I have opportunity to face it in a way that I've never faced before. So now I'm bowing to it, per se. I'm bowing to my ego. And that's what I'm wondering about anxiety, is if it's fear based and we start to bow to our we'll just say traumas, okay, for lack of better, if we bow to the things that torment us, how much power do they actually have over us?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm trying to answer it in the right way. I what I want to focus on is the power piece, right? And it goes back to what we talked about like in the last segment, right? Which is essentially you think that by like fighting your demons and standing up to your anxiety and being like, I'm not going to back down, you think that like you're like, hey, I'm the more powerful one, right? When in reality, what you're doing is you're sending that message to your brain that this thing is a real threat. You're
Mm-hmm.
giving it its power, right?
Yes.
So it is important to,
Yep.
as you said, like, well, find a way to strip it of its power to be like, and it doesn't have to be, some sexy thing, and it might even be
Right.
cheesy. I don't
Well,
know.
it's
But
ugly.
if you're just like, yeah, and it could be super ugly. It's like, but if you're just like, you know what, dude, like, guess what? If I have a hockey game and I throw up before it starts, like, I just don't care,
Yep.
like, and then it's just not hanging over you. It's just another thing. And again, I'm not trying to make light of these things because they are, like you said, they're ugly, they're difficult, they're painful. But the more that you just kind of, lean into these things, like the resistance is the thing that gives power, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I was talking to a colleague recently because we both suffer from anxiety, and I had never talked to him about that subject, but we just kind of shared stories or whatever. And he's like, yeah, give me some examples and XYZ. And I was like, yeah, man, like 10, 20 years ago, I'd go on a date, I'd be so freaking nervous. I would pretend like I wasn't, So I'd be, oh, look at me, like I'm cool and like, yeah, I'm totally suave, whatever. I'm sure the girl across the table from me was like, what is wrong with this person? And then so I was like, I went on a date like last year, and I showed up, and I was very nervous, but I just got there and I was like, hey, do you ever get nervous on dates? And the girl was like, sometimes. And I was like, yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I'll be good in 5 minutes. And you
Yeah.
really, what's the right, you just
Diffuse.
diffuse.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like
Yeah.
you're really trying to take that power away, right? It's
Yep.
people will often say like we're only as sick as our secrets, right? And it's like the more that you withhold that information, the more that it's growing and festering inside of you. If you're like, hey, I got my cards out on the table and I got nothing to hide, you really don't have anything to hide. And then there's no power that's being withheld, or you're not contributing to that power in any fashion that's making it worse for you.
Right. Right. No, man, that's awesome. That's there's something about one of my conversations that I've had, because I don't know if you've experienced this, but there's, especially in the psychologist field, the body remembers. Okay, the body is like the scorekeeper for basically trauma and what happened, and that's the reactive nature of who we are. And my question that keeps coming back to me is, how do we break the code? How do we how do we stand up to the very thing that has tormented the lineage, or what they say, the DNA, because that holds on too. And I think it's the counterintuitive of what we struggle with. Like, I don't fight the rage, I kneel to the rage. It's so stupid, but it makes so much sense. Like, I don't fight the anxiety, I kneel to the anxiety. I let go of the very thing that my body and brain are telling me. This let go of these false truths. And a lot of times what I realize is that I built these walls as a kid to protect myself. Those walls are no longer, it's like the Great Wall of China. It doesn't serve its purpose anymore. It's a showcase for people to walk on. But what it did was, it was a protective barrier between invasion. And I think what one Khan got through in in 1,000 years or something like that. So it served its purpose while it was available, but now it doesn't serve its purpose. And that's what I'm finding out at this age of my life. is those things I built as a kid are still defense walls that they're obsolete. They're really obsolete, because the reality is I'm not in danger almost any day of my life. Period. I mean, I've been all over this, pretty much a lot of the world, and I've been in more danger in the United States than anywhere else I've been in the world.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And the US is like, don't go anywhere. It's dangerous out there. It's dark. It's like, no, just go to Chicago. Fly into Chicago. You'll see dark. It's ugly.
Yeah. And it's tough. I mean, you're making a lot of good points. It's challenging because it's like, if I think, what I want to say what you're referring to is this book by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score. That's a really popular,
maybe it is.
Popular book. And so a lot of those phrases come from that in the field. It's so hard to, pull all that information out, figure out like how to deal with your trauma and whatnot. Not saying that we shouldn't try, but it can be very difficult to do so. And it's, funny might be the wrong word, but like, I'm just going to say funny. It's not comically funny. It may be ironic or something, right? That you think about all the different solutions and treatments and therapies and even, like psychedelics and all that. There's so many different modalities that people use to try to like go deep and go within and deal with their traumas and whatnot. It's certainly above my pay grade. I'm not smart enough to tell anyone how to deal with those things. And I think, in reality, a lot of what we're talking about is person centric, right? Or person specific. So it's like what works for me might not always work for you, vice versa, or for any other person. What I would say is I really think that so much of, unfortunately, it's like, we want that sexy answer. We want the silver bullet of like, I walk down the street, I take a left-hand turn, I take a right-hand turn, another left, I walk into the field, I meet this person, he, I meet this genie, he gives me everything I've ever wanted. Like, sadly, life just doesn't work that way. And so I'm like, and if it does for somebody, that's amazing. I'm very happy for you. I think they're not
probably listening to this podcast.
They're probably not. Yeah. A lot of life really comes down to, the unsexy quest that you have to go on, which is really exposure therapy times 10. And what I mean by that is, right, it's like, we read these books of like how to gain confidence and we go to these seminars, how to gain confidence. It's like, if you want the real answer, dude, like you just have to subject yourself to pain and you have to go out there and you have to do it again. And when it stinks, you take some time to recover, you get back out there, you do it again, you do it again, you do it again. You look back in 5 or 10 years and you're like, I'm in a radically different place now. A lot of it sucked. I wouldn't want to go back and do it, but here I am now. I got to a much better spot, right? So on the trauma side, I think something similar where it's like, just speaking from my own personal experience, right? It's like at an early age, I had a couple panic attacks on dates and that really stuck with me and hurt. And to be totally honest, it was like, I would pretty much, it wasn't like I was an alcoholic, but I was in college. So, you are given a free pass, so to speak, of like, if you drink a lot, nobody's going to look, into it much. They're not going to bat an eye. They're like, hey, everybody drinks in college. And so it's like, I kind of relied on that a little bit to be like, I'm nervous. I can get some liquid courage. I can drink. And, this was more like a weekends kind of thing, like everybody did. But I guess I also use that excuse to not really do the inner digging to be like, hey, I'm using this as a crutch, like not really owning up to it, And so as I've gotten older, it's like, for me, like correcting those situations in the dating field and like really trying to find that relationship that I'm looking for is just doing that unsexy work. It's going on dates, connecting with people, sometimes not connecting with them, sometimes having a really good one that I like, getting rejected, sometimes having someone who really likes me, rejecting them. Like it's just unsexy, but that's like the only thing that like you really need those corrective experiences for your brain to be like, look, I can date. I can do that. Whatever that thing was that was so deep seated in me that brought all those fears about and caused me to, sink into those avoidance behaviors. I can do those and it's okay. And I'm going to live and it's going to be painful at times, but I'm going to keep going. And eventually I'm going to get where I want to go. And that's really the answer. I hate to say it because it's like, you can't really, make a fortune selling a product based on that solution or write a best-selling book based on that solution. But so much of it is that.
Yeah. Yeah. And take your armor off and walk through the moat and you won't sink.
I like that one. That's good.
Yeah. So, well, we're going to close this out, man. This has been a real great conversation, and it's been a pleasure having you here. This has really been enjoyable for me, and getting to delve into anxiety a little more and what that is, and then you having experience in that, and then being able to write the book or both books. I just really admire that, and thank you for taking your pain and putting it into a place that helps others. And I think that's the true gift of what we do. And that's actually, I think, the true purpose behind. And so oftentimes we're looking for purpose, and really our purpose is standing right in front of us, and it's called suffering. And that's the catalyst to the change that we have available to us. And how we accept that invitation is well, it's on us. We all suffer. Everybody, every single person in this world, even the billionaires and the trillionaires, we all suffer. And how we accept the invitation is vital and key to our success of living. That has nothing to do with money.
It for the most part, it does not, right? And
Right.
really appreciate you having me on the pod. Great conversation. I think if I had to round it out with anything, is I think it comes from Friedrich Nietzsche, philosopher. This quote that feels pertinent right now, which is basically, to live is to suffer, yet to survive is to find meaning in the suffering, right? And I take that to heart.
I should have been Nietzsche.
Yeah.
Dang it. I haven't read his stuff and I just said it. It is. And, it is the spark. And that's what I learned when you become thankful for the things that have shaped you. And that is the suffering. That is the traumas, as ugly as they are. No, you don't want to relive them, but they are the things that have made you who you are. And we're one in 6 million or something like that swam the race to be able to have this opportunity for life. And people are like, well, I didn't choose it. No, none of us really did. Maybe not. Who cares? It's not about choice. It's about what you do with it. And for so long, I lamented and I was saddened in it. And now there's light and joy and purpose and kindness and love and things that I never understood before. And that's what we hope for all of, humanity, really. Wow, that's a weird one to say out of my mouth. But, I've always hated people equally, and now I love them. So I'm not prejudiced. I just have always hated them equally. But now I have this respect and reverence for people that is growing. So, which is a new thing for me, because humanity can be very harsh and disgusting sometimes. But there's something more to it. And there's something beautiful in the suffering and finding joy in that. And then realizing that that's not who you are. When you discover that, it's so enlightening and beautiful. Yeah. Well, Brian, thank you so much for being here. Brian Sachetta, ladies and gentlemen, an author of Get Out of Your Own Head. Looking for it on Amazon. It's got great reviews. This guy knows what he's talking about. He's got some work under his belt already done. So if you need some coaching for anxiety and whatever, I'm not sure what else you're doing in that field, just we'll put your information on the description and you can look him up. So again, thanks, Brian, for being here. And you got anything else?
Not a ton. I guess my second book is on depression. So if people are interested in that subject, definitely take a look at that. And happy to help people in either of those topics with those conditions or whatever. So again, Britton, thank you very much for having me. It was a delightful conversation. The time kind of flies by when you're having a good time. I know that's corny, but that's how I felt today. So thanks. It was great.
Yeah. After the 6-minute mark, you're like, I think we can do this. It's just we got to get to know each other, and it's a process. And it did go quick, and it was great, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining us on the Suicide Monk, and we'll see you on the good side.